Greetings. Father Mark signing on, continuing the course on the modern papacy, moving into the reign of Pope 252, Leo XII. Reigned from from September 28th, 1823 to February 10th, 1829. The conclave of 1823 lasted 2 months because the cardinals were sharply divided over the direction which the church should take in the future. Because remember, the late Pope who just died, Pius VII, reigned for 23 years, so almost a whole generation. Actually, it would be a generation depending on how you count. Some kind of generation 20 years, others 25. The personal prestige of the late Pope Pius VII, the personal suffering he endured for the church, the wrongful imprisonment and mistreatment by Napoleon, muted the criticism of Zelanti cardinals during his life, who felt that he was being too accommodating to the secular forces of the to the secular leadership of the Congress of Vienna system. Oh, I should say, I got an email question from one of the viewers about the term Zelanti I used. Apparently I used last time and maybe the time before without explaining it. So it's just derived from an Italian term. It's spelled Z-E-L-A-N-T-I. It means the zealous cardinal. So it was, if you read, accounts of the period, they'll often it was originally a derogatory term to describe the zealous cardinals, meaning, the traditionalist or the ultramontanes, or as today we'd say the conservatives, who were considered by those, who had a different ecclesiology as being unyielding, as being too rigid. So the Zelanti, think of, today, that term is interchangeable with traditionalist conservative. So anyway, once Pius VII was gone, these Zelanti cardinals pushed for a pope who was less open to accommodation or what, as they would say, appeasement of the secular, the post-Napoleonic secular rulers of the Congress of Vienna, because they remembered that the church had been weakened before the revolution precisely because of the monarchs relentlessly trying to dominate the church. And that was even Catholic monarchs, as we saw. The Zelanti could never bring themselves to trust any secular government, or really the secular order at all. So they think of the Zelanti as the fortress mentality that we've described before, that the secular order has already made its decision, that it's given itself to Satan. It's given its allegiance to Satan. So avoid it as much as possible. So see the church as a refuge from that. But in the end, they did not have the numbers to elect the person that they really wanted. So in the end, the conclave elected a diplomat. But as it turned out, one who had been burned enough to share the suspicions of the Zelanti. He was born August 22nd, 1760, into an aristocratic family in Spoleto. He was baptized Annibale della Genga. So Annibale, A-N-N-I-B-A-L-E. So Hannibal. It's the Italian rendering of Hannibal. Della, D-E-L-L-A. Then Genga, the house Genga, G-E-N-G-A. He had served as a nuncio to Cologne, Baden, Bavaria, and Paris. So the first three were German-speaking places. Paris, of course, is French. He had been captured and kept a prisoner by the French revolutionary armies during the entire captivity of Pius VII. Not with Pius VII, not in the same dungeon as Pius VII, but still, was his freedom was wrongfully taken from him. He personally disliked Cardinal Consalvi and mistrusted his openness to ideas of moderate government reforms as being the way to prevent radical revolution in the future. Delegenga served as Pope 252 for almost 6 years under the title Leo XII. In terms of governance, Leo XII immediately fired Cardinal Consalvi from his position as Secretary of State, moved him to be prefect of the propagation of the faith. One area of disagreement among many, with Consalvi and those of his way of thinking, of sort of the open ecclesiology, was with regard to the governance of the papal state. You remember, at this period, the Pope was also a monarch. He had, the papal state was his country, and he was a secular ruler of that. I mean, he was the temporal ruler, he was the temporal ruler of the papal state as well as being the spiritual. So when the French revolutionary armies conquered Italy, they did what they did in all the other countries they conquered. They abolished the aristocracy, abolished feudalism, and installed republics in their place based on popular sovereignty, as they said. Although it was really voting for adult males, but still there was more representation than they had under feudalism. Following Cardinal Consalvi's advice, Pius VII had not reinstated the aristocracy of the papal states after the Congress of Vienna. And he even allowed a measure of popular representation in government of the towns in the papal state, like an elected city council, as we would say today. Leo XII immediately reversed this by restoring the aristocracy as well as restoring medieval feudalism in the papal state in all of its forms. Exactly as it had been prior to the Revolution. He restored ecclesiastical courts. He reimposed clerical supervision of teaching in all schools. His fear of revolutionary movements proved to be so extreme that the government of his territory became like the governments in the other Restoration monarchies, essentially a police state, a surveillance state, a police state. This is significant for the future because it explains why so many Italians later in the century betrayed the Holy See, turned on the Holy See and the Church, and supported the theft of the papal states at the time of Italian unification in 1860. So the guys who were adults when that happened grew up, like they were kids growing up under Leo XII, and some, the older ones, remembered both. They may have had childhood memories of local city councils and remembered all of that being abolished and feudalism being reimposed. And so then as adults, those are the same ones. It's the same generation, that just when they were old enough to do something, why they turned on the church. It was during Leo's reign that a branch of Freemasonry formed in Italy, which adopted the guise of charcoal sellers. So the Freemasonry, in its original, they adopted the nomenclature and the, costuming of stonemasons, even though, as we saw, that they weren't. I go into this more in the American history class. But in Italy, there was the charcoal selling was their public presentation. So they're conventionally known as the Carbonari, Carbonari, the charcoal burners. Like the Freemason movement in general, from which its early leadership was drawn, the Carbonari was a secret organization of men with rituals of initiation, secret recognition signals, and an internal command structure. Unlike the British Freemasonry, who for the most part were involved in philanthropic endeavors, more humanitarian, brotherhood of man kind of endeavors, the Carbonari were closer in structure and intent and ideology to the French version of Freemasonry, from which so many of the revolutionaries were drawn, like Robespierre, Danton. Those guys were all Freemasons. The Carbonari shared that view, political ideology, to unite Italy under a secular republic. To this end, they fomented riots, carried out assassinations, engaged in widespread vandalism, actually led numerous violent revolts, uprisings in Naples, Sardinia, Savoy, Lombardy, and, as we'll see, the Papal States. Their open involvement in the Papal State will be revealed in a future papal reign, but for now, remember, they came into existence during the reign of Leo XII as a reaction to his reimposition of feudalism. And during his reign in 1821, and uprisings, not at the time understood to be Carbonari, but in fact, in retrospect, there were. They had to be put down by regular army troops, Austrian army troops allied to Leo, in Naples and on the island of Sardinia in 1821. When Leo XII reimposed feudalism on the Papal States, the Carbonari then identified that pope in particular, as well as the papacy in general, as the enemy of Italian nationalism and Italian unification, which is the only way that subsequent history in Italy can be understood. So, that'll be built up over the next several papal reigns. Turning to the New World, following his policy of ignoring secular governments, Leo XII proclaimed on May 21st, 1827, that he would begin appointing bishops for vacant dioceses in Latin American republics. This antagonized both the royalty of Spain, which regarded all of those their former colonies as stolen territory, stolen by the decolonization uprisings. And it also antagonized the new Republican governments in those former colonies, who wanted to retain the right of patronage that the former Spanish monarchy had enjoyed. But Leo didn't care. That's part of the Zelanti view. He didn't care if secular governments were mad, because he figured that they're already the enemy, that everything secular is already the enemy of the sacred. That no matter what we as a church do, they're never going to be happy. They're never going to be satisfied, no matter how many concessions that we give to them. So why bother? If they're going to be mad at us anyway, let's save the energy of trying to appease them and just do whatever he discerned to be the right thing, knowing it's going to be denounced. Just as if he had tried to appease, it would never be enough, so that also would be denounced. So that's the Zelanti mindset. In 1829, an event occurred in England that's striking in the history, from when we began in the Protestant movement, in terms of Catholic-Protestant relations on the British Isles. This is the Catholic Emancipation Act of 1829, which brings us back to Ireland. So a brief survey of Ireland from 1170 to 1850, with particular focus on English repression and occupation of the Irish, is essential in understanding Irish nationalism and how it was so entwined with Catholicism. So English involvement in Ireland began in the medieval period when Dermot MacMurrough who was deposed king of one of the small kingdoms in Ireland, the Kingdom of Leinster, invited Norman knights, remember them from the medieval course, led by Richard Fitzgilbert de Clare, the Earl of Pembroke, to help him regain his throne in May of 1170. So just as the Norman knights had done in Naples and Sicily and Normandy and England, as well as during the Crusades in the East, in Outremer, steady encroachment by the Normans resulted in an Ireland divided ethnically between Anglo-Ireland, or Norman Ireland, and Celtic Ireland. And that was already the case before the Protestant movement. It was already that ethnic division based on occupation by Normans, these are the English Normans. So that was already the case when Henry VIII broke from the church in 1534. The Anglo occupation, the Anglo parts of Ireland, then had another level of division in that they were a religious division because they became Protestant, and whereas the Celtic, the Gaelic Ireland, remained Catholic. So this Protestant cultural, religious, military imperialism continued under Henry VIII's successors. Well, not Queen Mary, but it continued under Edward VI and then Elizabeth I. It solidified differences and made any kind of accommodation or assimilation impossible. So Catholicism became the identity of the oppressed, and Protestantism became the identity of the oppressor, of the occupation. In 1607, James I, the Stuart King of England, the successor of Elizabeth I, escalated the problem. Because remember, he was also James VI of Scotland, in addition to being James I of England. He escalated the problem by settling Scottish Presbyterians in Northern Ireland, installing an entire alien population as overlords. The Irish penal laws, the anti-popery laws, followed. As we covered those, I think we did in this course. I forget what we covered. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we covered this. The anti-popery laws earlier in the course, and it just escalated. So every time there were periodic outbreaks of Irish nationalism where they tried to get their country back, and with varying degrees of success, there were periodic tactical victories, but in the long term, the occupation continued, and each time there was an uprising, when the Protestants finally crushed it, then the situation became worse. Then the laws became even more oppressive, and the treatment of the Irish in their own country became even harsher. So, in particular, after the Battle of the Boyne River in 1690, that's Boyne, the situation under William III, William and Mary, of Orange, the king, the new monarchs, Protestant monarchs of England, who overthrew James II, relegated the Catholic Irish to a disenfranchised, perpetual, almost illiterate or at least semi-literate underclass. Deliberately withholding education from them in their own country, with the Catholic religion as one thing they clung to during the long period of national humiliation. Between 1782 up to 1801, there was an Irish nation, but it was Protestant, politically. Meaning the overlords were Protestant. An Irish Revolution took place in 1798 during the whole French Revolutionary period. That was led by Anglo-Irish political radicals who wanted to break away from England but there'd be Protestant. Now, that was brutally suppressed. But when they rose up, then the Irish Catholics rose up against them, against the Anglo-Irish Protestants. So we have the Anglo-Irish Protestants crushing the Catholic Irish, or the real Irish. I mean, those in their country. At the same time that the Anglo-Irish occupation was rebelling against the mother country, and they were crushed. So it was a bad time for the country. England's response, after crushing all of this, was the coerced political union of the two islands, England and Ireland, on January 1st, 1801. Irish nationalism emerged immediately when it became clear that the Union would perpetually deny Catholics basic civil rights and would consign them to barely subsistence poverty, as all the best land was stolen. In fact, all the land was stolen by the overlords, by the occupation. So the first hero of this period, the post-1801 period, was Robert Emmet, E-M-M-E-T. He was executed after a failed uprising in 1803. Another leader, now this is all to explain the Catholic Emancipation Act, so this jumping to Daniel O'Connell. He lived from 1775 to 1847. He was an Enlightenment liberal Democrat, he's the one that actually he made it happen, the Catholic emancipation, by providing focus and tactics to support a particular strategy that seemed very limited to the impatient, those who were impatient and wanted their country back, which of course was their right. But he understood, just surveying the history, that the uprisings attempting to get it back all at once had all been crushed. So he thought of an increment, take a little, then a little more, then a little more, then a little more. Eventually it would happen. So his strategy was in 1823. No, that was his strategy. Tactically, in 1823, he founded the Catholic Association as what I suppose we'd call it today a lobbying group, or what's the name? Yeah, I guess lobbying group. There's another name I'm thinking of, but that's what it was. Specifically to agitate for emancipation. It required dues, so that there was a level of sacrifice, but it did give the Irish a sense of focus, for their desire. So under O'Connell's leadership, this Catholic Association adopted a novel strategy. As they were denied civil rights, so they couldn't be elected. They couldn't have their own elected representatives, but they could raise money. And now that Ireland was forced, was controlled by the Parliament in London, and those MPs had to run for election, and so they needed money. So this Catholic Association, even though they could not yet run for office, they could raise money and support candidates who were Protestant, but moderate Protestant, and for various reasons agreed with Catholic emancipation of the Irish, either for humanitarian reasons or because they believed that the police state imposed on Ireland to keep them suppressed was just too expensive to justify keeping it, or they were just cynical and just were taking the money, just because they didn't have any other source. Anyway, the tactics supporting O'Connell's strategy worked, the incremental strategy, resulting in the English Parliament, even though it's all Protestants, passing the Catholic Relief Act of 1829, which, since the forced unification of Ireland and England, applied to Ireland. So it didn't give the Irish back their country, but it did provide some, not equal civil rights with the English, but more than they had. But that was a strategy: take a little, then a little more, then a little more. The practical effect of the act was minimal for the average worker, because basic civil rights in England, while they were better than on the continent, they certainly were not what they are today. So, for example, not every adult male citizen, even English Protestants, they could not all vote. That there was a wealth qualification, to be able to vote. So the poor in England could not vote, and so the poor in Ireland could also not vote. But at least they were, back on the same level in that regard. But it was a step in the right direction, and so it provided more space for the movement to function within a constitutional framework, within a legal framework, to not give the hardliners, the hardline English imperialists, any excuse to use the military to go kill more Irish. Okay. In terms of teaching and sanctification by Leo XII, 1825 was a holy year. So we saw that back in the medieval course. The first one was 1300. Initially, they were every 50 years, and then during the Renaissance, it was changed to every 25 years. Well, with the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, they were missed. It was missed so 1825 was the first holy year that a pope was able to proclaim since before the French Revolution. And that one in 1825 promoted the parish mission movement, which in the 19th century usage meant a visit to parishes by one or more priests for a week or more in order to preach and teach for the purpose of promoting and restoring proper devotional practice and to correct understanding of the faith. Because Europe it had at least a generation had grown up without that because of the distraction of all the wars and so many young people being forced into the militaries for all these these conflicts. So he's repairing the damage. In other words, this is a step toward Leo repairing the damage. Leo XII believed strongly in this method, the parish mission method, and it was used to great effect previously in history during the Catholic Counter-Reformation of the 16th and 17th centuries. It had fallen into disuse during the Enlightenment for reasons we've already covered, but after as part of the Restoration after the Revolution and Napoleon, it was the method was revived, and it accounts for the remarkable Catholic revival that happened in the 19th century. Like Saint John Vianney, Saint Teresa of Lisieux. Those kids grew up, in the environment created by this, by the parish mission movement. And all the other young kids that had inspired to go into religious life, then they grew up to be, and so that's how it takes generations to repair the damage. But he started it. This revival, this Catholic revival in the 19th century, also included a revival of Thomism, the study of Aquinas, as well as in the visual arts, reviving the use of Gothic architecture. So this is the Neo-Gothic period. Meaning to make a clear connection between the medieval age of faith and this revival, this aggressive reassertion of the faith after the damage of the Enlightenment, the Revolution, and Napoleon, as an antidote to the atheism promoted by the Enlightenment, and then going into the 19th century, that didn't go away. The 19th, 20th, and now the 21st century. Atheism has been. It's almost evangelical now, where the atheists they're not content to just declare their own non-belief. They want to convert believers to non-belief. Leo XII died unexpectedly, suddenly, as he appeared to be, in good health, active for a man of his age. He had a full day of meetings, and at the end he just died. It was a sudden catastrophic heart failure on February 10th, 1829. After a reign of 5 years and 5 months. He was followed by another brief reign, very brief, a reign of 20 months, Pope Pius VIII, And it is with Pius VIII that we will occupy ourselves next time. So for now, thank you for your attention. This session is adjourned.